Hello guys, this is your friend Naruto Fanfic Series 2.0 and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is What If Naruto Got Harem with Tsunade, Anko and Hinata Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Black and white. That was the world. No color, no sound, no smell, just a silent picture that seemed to pass by. Naruto was aimlessly wandering around town, trying to make sense of it all. He wondered if he did something terrible wrong for all of the things that happened in the last 2 weeks. He had to have done something. Otherwise nothing made sense. But even after 6 hours of randomly walking in the soundless, odorless and colorless world, he could not think of one tiny thing to. Tea was bad enough to break him like this. He fought damn hard in the 4th Shinobi War. He would like to think that his arrival turned the tide because he was able to locate the infiltrating white Zetsus. And that just concerns the foot soldiers of the enemy army. He had helped seal a dozen or more revived people, saved more than 100 and again, that was just for the front line. It wasn't even counting the big fights, with Uchiha Obito and Uchiha Madara. And they were using the 7 fallen Jinchuriki complete with perfect control of their demon, a Sharingan and the Rinnegan. But he had prevailed. True, he wasn't able to save Kakashi, but he still visited the grave today, 3 years after the war was over. He fulfilled every promise he could remember, even bringing Sasuke back. The promise was honored 6.5 years after he had made it, but he still did it. He had brought Sasuke back after the second most dangerous battle of his life. Of course, Sasuke alone was no comparison with the final battle of the war. Though it was emotionally. But he had brought the man back to Konoha and fulfilled his promise with Sakura. The mere thought of the pink-haired girl stabbed his heart repeatedly. He had spent every second he knew the girl, trying to go on a date with her. After the war she had agreed. They had the best time. They were dating seriously for a year, nothing could go wrong. Naruto was even planning on popping the big question. It all changed in a heartbeat. It all changed 2 weeks ago, just before a romantic dinner, with a hand on the box containing the ring. Naruto had brought back Sasuke 6 weeks before. He had been detained for his crimes, but just before Naruto and Sakura were to enter the restaurant, the most XP. NSIVE and romantic Naruto could find, Sasuke walked up to them. It was surreal. What was the raven-haired guy doing here? Wasn't he supposed to be in jail? Before Naruto got to ask him why he was free, Sakura let go of his hand, jumped at the Uchiha and kissed him. Not a peck on the cheek. No, Naruto could see tongue being exchanged. Apparently, Sasuke no longer wanted to destroy Konoha and was willing to rebuild his clan here, in the village that his ancestors started. Conveniently leaving the Senju clan out of the equation. He had even chosen the perfect girl for it, the girl that always worshipped him, apparently. The girl didn't even look at her blonde boyfriend when she squealed in delight that she was in the arms of her crush, and this time he didn't push her away, but actually hugged her back. He was heartbroken, he was angry, he was jealous, he was done. Done with her, done with his former best friend. Said friend, even smirked at him smugly. The Uchiha name had gotten him out of prison by the civilian council. Because the precious remaining member of the founding clan of the village was too precious to lock away. The color started to drain from the world at that day. But all was not lost. Even if his love life was shot to hell, there was still the upcoming retirement of Senju Tsunade. Seeing as Naruto had grown into a fine young man, that has displayed tremendous prowess throughout the years, not to mention being the hero that saved the world from Uchiha Madara's plan, he was the favorite for being selected as the Rokudaime Hokage. Danzo was never instated, so he was left out of history as village leader. How wrong Naruto was. It happened just now, 7 hours ago. The Godaime was to announce her successor and all the shinobi and many of the prominent civilians were there. Naruto was giddy with excitement. He was the favorite after all. His lifelong dream was about to be fulfilled. But when he saw the barely restrained anger on the older woman's face, he started to get worried. When she gave him an apologetic look, he was extremely disappointed. But the last bit of color, sound and smell left as she announced the next leader of the village. I hereby announce that Uchiha Sasuke will be the Rokudaime Hokage. Quote. Many of the shinobi were shocked at hearing this. The major clans present wore the same look as Tsunade herself, barely concealed anger. But it didn't matter how they looked, it seemed that the civilian council had their way again and chose the precious Uchiha as next Hokage, ignoring the fact he was a traitor to the village, had killed several shinobi and was responsible of more than one of the near-death experiences Naruto had, the hero of the village. As if that wasn't bad enough, the villagers, who were finally showing him some respect and kindness for the efforts in the war and defeating pain when he saved the village, were forgotten. He had banged up the now Hokage. He had injured him severely. He was a monster after all. He had not just lost his girl and his dream, he had once again lost his place in the society he had nearly died for 100 times. Sakura walked up with Sasuke, clinging to his arm, and the Sharingan wielder gave him another smug smirk when he accepted the position. He would be instated next week, to let the current Hokage finish her running projects and give him time to settle in. The shinobi who were going to shout in protest had whipped to the side when they heard a single person clapping, and many of them hung their head in pain when they saw Naruto clapping. His face was pale and devoid of emotion, but his eyes had said it all. Tears flowed freely across his cheeks without sobbing or sniffling, and the spark of life that inspired so many was gone. The boy they had come to adore and admire had now left in its place an empty shell of who he used to be. The memories kept on repeating themselves in his head, and his steps were sluggish. Even after 8 hours, he was still a wreck, even more so than when he left the ceremony. The Konoha 11, minus Sakura and Naruto, had been frantically searching for the blonde. Mitarashi Anko and Senju Tsunade had joined the search. The group of 12 had looked high and low, but even though he wasn't at any of his usual spots, they couldn't find him. When one Hyuga Hinata finally did, she sent a signal to the rest of the group. Naruto walked on ahead, with no real destination or purpose in mind, but he soon found 12 people in front of him. He saw their mouths moving, but couldn't hear the words. He saw Tsunade and Hinata stepping closer to him, but he couldn't see the usual bluish or blonde color of their hair. He simply moved his head to his side in confusion, before asking in a monotone voice what they were saying and what was wrong. Tsunade and Hinata cried when they saw the lifeless boy. It was just too much. Tsunade tried to explain that she had really tried to name him, but the civilian council wouldn't allow him to be the next Hokage. That the civilians outvoted the shinobi on the matter. Neji, Hinata, Choji, Shikamaru, Kiba, Ino, they all confirmed it. They had been told by their family, who all had seats on the shinobi part of the council. Naruto told them that it didn't matter. And with a flash of yellow he found himself at his house. He went to sleep. Maybe if he woke up in the morning, he would find out it was all a dream and none of it all happened. He would wake up with Sakura in his arms. They would walk up to the ceremony where he would be named Hokage. His life never did go as he wanted, for when he woke up the next day, he was still depressed. He still felt betrayed and he was getting angrier by the second. He got up for a shower, but everything went on automatic. He barely registered the scorching hot water that pelted against his skin. He barely registered the rough towel that he used to dry of the last remnants of water. He was out of his house and walked towards the graveyard. Maybe spending some time with his parents or his perverted teacher or even the Sandame would break him out of this spell. It did, but only a little bit. It only angered him more in the end, when he looked at the names of the people who sacrificed their life to protect Konoha. He felt as if the village betrayed the engraved names, by selecting a traitor for the metaphorical throne. He kept on staring at each name. Tears fell when he thought about his fallen family. His real parents, his godfather and his grandfather, The last two never actually were related by blood, but their role in his life was nothing less. It was a strange thought, when he out of nowhere saw that in a way they all had something to do with Fuinjutsu. All of them were a master, 3 of them died using the most powerful on. He decided that it might not be a bad thing to learn some on his own, to honor them all at the same time. A long walk to the library later, he entered the new building. He was already used to the glares that he was getting, so he simply walked by the front desk and looked up a book about the art of sealing. It turned out there weren't that many of them, but he did finally find one. It told of the basics and how symbols worked. And what the possibilities were. There were basically no limits. The people that were considered masters of the art never got the change to experiment a lot due to circumstances. And a lack of time. He chuckled at the thought. With his Kage Bunshin he could easily counter that. Someone walked by him, bumping into him on purpose and knocked the book of the table. Naruto simply ignored the prick of a man and picked up his book but stopped halfway when he read one of the pages on the open page. The members of the Uzumaki clan were the sealing experts of the world. Their prowess was feared by all except the Senju clan who they were related to. They had their own hidden village on a small island not that far from the country of Wave. Sadly, they were so feared that several villages banded together to wipe them out. Fortunately more than one of the villagers escaped, his mother being one, that much he knew. He wanted to see the place he decided then. It took him less time than his trip to the library to reach the Hokage's office. Tsunade was surprised to see him, but was glad all the same. When she confirmed he was at home asleep yesterday, only then did she allow herself the time to nearly drink herself to death. She had just woken up, trying to wrap up her own projects as perfectly as possible, while creating the most difficult of projects for her successor. Naruto was a pleasant distraction. She was shocked at his question. He wanted a sabbatical. She was sad to say that he couldn't get one, because he already had one when he left with Jiraiya on a 3-year training trip. When he explained why he wanted it, and that he really needed the 1 year to come to terms with all that was happening in the village, she really had to think on what she could do to let him do what he wanted. Luckily she didn't have to think long. Naruto had the solution. Then give me the title of sage. That way I can come and go as I please. Tsunade was surprised at the suggestion. She wasn't sure if it was possible. On the other hand, why shouldn't it be? She became a senin when she studied under the elder of the snails. Jiraiya became a senin when studying under the elder of the toads. The same was true for Orochimaru, who studied with the snakes. That was just after the 3 of them were titled Sannin. Naruto had studied among the toads and he was at the very least a battle sage. He has been undefeated for the past 6 years. Even under impossible odds. And it could be her final gift to him as Hokage. She agreed. Naruto would be a senin. She asked the young man in front of her when he was planning to go and if he was going to return. The blonde replied that he was definitely coming back, because he still had some friends here. He didn't know what he might do after that, but he would definitely return after his trip. Tsunade was sad to see him go, but she understood. His girl stolen, his dreams crushed and even his deeds were ignored. He was betrayed by the very village he trusted. If he would leave the village, so would she had nothing besides the blonde here anyway. But she would wait here for his return, so he would get a warm welcome from at least one person in this village. Hinata was just as sad as Tsunade, though she wasn't aware yet that Naruto was planning to leave for a year. But for her crush to be broken like this, she felt her own heart shatter. And it wasn't only Naruto that was affected by this new development, her father was livid as well. The Hyuga clan was one closest to nobility and they valued honor and propriety as much as they valued strength. For a deserter of the village, who had to be dragged back to the village, to be chosen as the next leader of the village all because of his family's name went too far even for the tight-knitted clan of Dujutsu wielders. Her teammates, Aburame Shino and Inazuka Kiba, whose parents were both on the shinobi part of the council, had reported their father, mother having the same reaction. Hinata was trying to come up with methods of cheering up her crush, but couldn't think of anything. She was surprised when out of nowhere, the subject of her thoughts stood in front of her. She started blushing and mumbling, but the apathetic look on Naruto's face stopped her in her tracks. She asked him how he was holding up, if she could do anything for him. He slowly shook his head, even that simple gesture, performed as slowly as that by the usually energetic young man, felt like a stab to her heart. He started talking and she listened to his every word. She wanted to cry when he said that he was going to be traveling for a bit, to search for his hist. Ori. But she understood, everybody needed time to come to terms with life-changing events. She asked if he would come back and felt relief flood her when he nodded in acquiescence. Her relief soon turned into confusion when he apologized. She made known that she didn't know why he did that, but what she thought he had forgotten, he never had. He apologized for never giving her a reply for her confession during the pain invasion. She started to feel more nervous than she had ever been, but his next words made her feel grateful. I have been selfish. At that time, there really wasn't any time for me to properly think about whom I loved and who I would want to be with. Sakura tried to deceive me then by confessing to me as well. But when everything was over, I still had feelings for Sakura. Even though I always thought about you, I thought it would be unfair to give a reply while I wasn't sure about my feelings. I still am not sure about what I feel towards you, and if you have moved on I don't blame you, but if not, could you give me a bit more time to discover myself before I answer to you? She knew that if she was any other girl with any other boy as her crush, she would have gotten over him within the first year. But this was no longer a crush, she loved this blonde man. With everything she had, she was the last of the Konoha rookies that was still single. She didn't mind. Neji was engaged with his former teammate Tenten. Shikamaru found the average woman he always wanted in a woman from the decryption department named Chiho. Shino was married to a girl from a rival clan, in the hopes of merging their clans. Choji, Kiba, Ino and Rock Lee had all found their lovers, partners or fiancé. She was the last one with Naruto, even though his breakup was not expected. She could wait a bit longer. He smiled then. Not a fake smile like he used to when he was a boy or an emotionless smile like she had expected from him in this state, but a true smile. True, it was small, but it was real and her little heart fluttered at the sight. Yes, she could definitely wait a bit longer for him, but only because it was him. She hoped he would be safe until he got back. But most of all, she hoped that he could find something to get him past this. Mitarashi Anko had been planning the assassination ever since she heard the news of the little traitor's major and undeserved promotion. Even if the kid wasn't a traitor, he was officially still a genin. The one she thought that did deserve this, she saw breaking apart. She wished she could do more to help him, but she also knew that he would be the first suspect if the Hokage to be was killed before or even after he was inaugurated. Anko was about to leave though the gate for a mission when she saw her hero walking with the Sennin outfit he wore during the Pain invasion, a crimson-red long overcoat with black trimmings. He had only 2 large scrolls on his back and he seemed to set out. She called his name and watched as lifeless eyes turned back to look at her. She flinched when she saw it. Anko could still remember the day he saved her from Sasuke's former subordinates. She never remembered them taking her after Kabuto managed to knock her out, but when she came to she was being carried by a big guy. She had no concrete idea of what was planned for her, but she was too drained of chakra and stamina to be able to talk, let alone move. There was a glint in their eyes which shook her body with fear. If it wasn't for Naruto accidentally stumbling upon them in his search for Zetsu's base, who knew how she would have ended up? She asked him where he was going and he briefly explained that he found out about his clan and their home. He was going to try and find out more about himself in the hopes to overcome this, his, tragedy. She could understand to a certain extent. She was an orphan from birth, never knowing who her parents were. She would like to think that she might find comfort in finding out about her heritage. She was curious if he was coming back, even if he wasn't her savior, he was a cool guy to hang around with. He had grown up tremendously from the brat she once nicked with her knife during the Chunin exam. Would she leave the village if he did leave? She did owe him her life. It was only normal to serve someone until that debt was repaid. Naruto, if you ever need anything, anything at all and it is within my power, all you need to do is ask and I will do everything I can do to help you. The smile she got in return warmed her in more ways than she wanted to admit. She watched as the young man set out towards the horizon. His broad shoulders on his tall muscular frame. He was so much like his father, it was almost scary. Even the way his smile affected the ladies. She wouldn't mind a romp with him once. It would be a good way to repay the debt. Once the blonde hero was no longer visible, she took off for her own mission. She would have to wait and see what will happen in the future. But she meant what she said. All he had to do is ask. It took 1 week to arrive at Uzushiogakure. The traveling itself was easy. Within 4 days Naruto was at the land of waves, boarding a ship towards his ancestral home. The other 3 days were spent trying to find a way past the whirlpools protecting the island. When the blonde did finally arrive, he was dead beat. He wanted to look around as much as possible, but he knew he had plenty of time. He would set up camp for now and go to sleep. Tomorrow he would try and dig up some of his past in these ruins. After 3 weeks and several hundred kage bunshin, Naruto had pretty much seen every nook and cranny except for one section of the village. Where he was depressed before, he felt amazement now. The ruins of this now destroyed village were magnificent. He simply had no other word for it. The pieces that were the most intact showed how large the buildings were. Naruto was used to buildings not being overly high, so they wouldn't stick out above the trees. But these buildings were all gigantic in comparison. He wondered if it had to do with the location of the village. The land of whirlpools was a mere fraction of the size of the land of fire, but there was nothing else on this abandoned isle. He had been to Suna and Kumo, he even had a sneak peek at the building style of Iowa, but those villages had to hide their village in the country they were at. So buildings in Suna were extremely low to the ground. Buildings in Kumo were built in the mountains of their village and Iowa even made their houses as if they were stalagmites. This village was on an island that was hidden on its own. No sailor could see it because they would stay clear of the well-known whirlpools of this island, and even if they wanted to come here because they knew of this village, they couldn't because of the very same reason. The whirlpools blocked the path. The first week had been the toughest. In every collapsed building he found old personal items. They ranged from stuffed teddy bears to music boxes with family heirlooms and antique paintings to family crests. The people had to leave in a hurry when they left. It was sad really, seeing how much destruction a war could cause. He realized it as soon as he found the first few skeletons. It weren't the fully grown ones that freaked him out. He had seen plenty of death in the last war. It were the underdeveloped ones, the skeletons of children, that got to him the most. He was glad that after searching through 80% of the fallen village, he had only seen a dozen, but every one of them was one too many. He remembered breaking down when he saw the bones covered in a little pink dress, still holding a doll. It was too hard. He had collected all of the remains he had found and buried them on the cliff overlooking the sea, facing southeast, so the spirits of the deceased would not look upon another land, but the wide expanse of the ocean. Today he would start on looking through the center point of the village. It was a collection of 3 buildings, 2 of which seemed to be a compound. He decided to save it for last, so he could use it as a focus point. He was pretty sure that he could find the most of his family in one of those buildings. He already had a pretty good idea to what they were. The middle of the 3 ruins was most likely the main office for the ninja forces. From what he could see, it would probably have been 3 to 4 stories high and was round in design. The way all the main paths in the village led to it, it couldn't be anything else but some kind of administration office. There was only one major administration that a ninja village needed: the office of the village leader, the mission bureau, and civil service. Since Uzushiogakure was inspired by Konoha, it wasn't a long shot to expect some of the layout to be similar. The Uzumaki clan was the main clan in this village. They were the founders and they were the strongest. It was recorded in every bit of wisdom he had found so far. Diaries, journals, and the few history books that remained. He briefly wondered why there's so little books around. He hadn't even found something that would have resembled a library. In any case, seeing as the Uzumaki clan was as prominent as the Hyuga or Uchiha in Konoha, it wasn't that strange to believe they had a compound of their own. He had no idea which of the two it would be, or to which clan the other one would belong to, but he would find out eventually. The last part of the town, the part where the most answers should have been, took the longest amount of time to look through. The buildings weren't high, but they were large enough. What seemed to cause the most problems was the amount of devastation that occurred here. Besides a few of the outside walls, everything was razed to the ground. There was not a single piece of furniture undamaged, no a picture unscathed, everything was destroyed. Naruto was depressed when he went through the last inch of the last compound. Not a single piece of his mother had been found, not a picture, a mention in a diary or some other kind of book. If he didn't know better, it would seem like the Uzumaki clan never existed here. But that was probably the intent behind the attack that destroyed this village. Wipe out the Uzumaki bloodline. He went to sit at a dry fountain in the middle of the mansion he was at. He was wondering where he would go now. He could go and visit with Killer Bee in Kumo, or Chojuro in Kiri, maybe Akatsuchi in Iwa. He decided to make a tour through the elemental countries. Starting in Kiri, then to Kumo, proceeding to Iwa and ending it in Suna to see Gaara before heading back to Noa. He still had 11 months before he promised Tsunade and Hinata to be back. Naruto leaned back, thinking about the Hyuga heiress. He moved his hands behind him to support him, but he didn't notice the jagged edges of the stone sculpture he was sitting on. He pulled his hand back as soon as he felt his hand being cut and sucked on the wound to clean it. He was swearing under his breath when he looked at the offending spot. What he saw was one thing he would remember until the end of time. His blood started to move on its own. It moved towards the center of the fountain and spread out, forming some kind of seal. Naruto moved away from the stone decoration. He thought he triggered some kind of defense mechanism. To his surprise, the broken piece of stone started glowing brighter and brighter, till Naruto had to cover his eyes. He tried to sneak a peek through his fingers, but the light was painful to his orbs. He could vaguely see the stone shifting and reshaping until it looked like a doorway. A doorway that led to a spiraling staircase. Curiosity might have killed the cat, but Naruto would be a fool if he hadn't explored a mystery like this. Who didn't like a good adventure? The blonde kept on going down the stairs until, after wait seemed like an hour, he stepped onto a solid floor. There was no source of light, but luckily Naruto had brought a torch with him. He wasn't stupid enough to travel underground without a source of light with him. Age had brought him a bit of wisdom, even if he didn't show it that often. He quickly lit the piece of lumber and looked around. Naruto found himself in a circular room with several places for torches on the walls. There was one passageway directly in front of him and nothing else in the room. He sent a Kage Bunshin back upstairs to try and find as much pieces of wood that could function as a torch. He would need lots of light around here if he was going to look around. It took 2 days to look around the compound he just finished. Who knew how long this secret cavern would take? As he and his clone split up, Naruto slowly walked towards the corridor. He immediately saw the Uzumaki symbol on either side of the path and more places for torches. He kept on walking. The path was straight so he didn't have to worry about getting lost, until he saw 2 doors. He moved his hand over a small metal plate next to the door on his right, trying to wipe away the thick layer of dust that had settled, and found the word, history, written on it. He blinked once and then some more and grabbed the doorknob to open it. He felt a pinprick in the palm of his hand. He looked at it and found a small smudge of blood on it. He turned toward the doorknob again and saw it glowing, before opening itself. He came upon a room that was filled with bookcases. Each of them easily stood 6 meters high and all of them were filled to the brim with books and scrolls. He walked towards one of the bookcases and found another metal plaque on it. He wiped it away once more and found it saying, "Land of Water." He turned towards the bookcase once more and grabbed the first book within reach. Browsing through the bundle of paper, he came to the conclusion that it was all about a researcher under command of the Shadaime Mizukage. He just put it back in its place. At some point his clone came back and started placing torches on the designated area. Naruto felt his eyes bulge as he saw the amount of books here. He was wondering if all of this was really just history. So leaving another clone here to see if he could find anything about his clan, and the first one fetching some more torches, he made his way to the next door, directly across the hallway. He removed some more dust from a plaque and read the label. Geography. It sounded boring, but who knew what kind of interesting things one might find. He never expected himself to read through history books either, so why not geography too? Besides, how much could there be about the land? He was right. This room was much smaller than the previous one, but still held an impressive amount of reading material. Wanting to cut this a little shorter than with history, he grabbed the first book and read the title. Iron. Yeah, this was going to be boring. He walked back to the hallway and looked what else could be found. He came from the left, so he turned right. He came to the next set of doors and cleaned both of the plaques before looking at the labels. One read, Bujutsu, and the other one said Taijutsu. He was surprised to see the two forms of martial arts here, so he eagerly opened the first door to unarmed combat. He was already getting used to the familiar pinprick every time he opened a door. The new room was just like the previous ones and held a bucket load of books. He briefly wandered through it, but he had a suspicion that he wanted confirmed. He would explore every room, just to see how large the spaces were, if there were any other doors within the rooms. So after that he walked to the Bujutsu room. Like before, there were several cases. But the difference was that every bookcase had a weapon hanging over it. He walked towards the closest one, not wanting to spend so much time on it, and grabbed out a book from the cases that had a bow staff hanging. Above it, like he suspected, there was a style illustrated and explained on it. Now he really wanted to see if his suspicions were correct. The next set of doors proved it. Genjutsu and ninjutsu. He hit the jackpot. He skipped the door of the art of illusion. He had always favored ninjutsu over everything, even ramen. This room was laid out exactly like the others, bookcase after bookcase. It resembled the Bujutsu room somewhat, seeing as every bookcase held a symbol of some sort above it. He had to reach to see what it was, but it turned out that they were symbols of elements. He really had found the jackpot. He had to refrain himself from jumping into the scrolls and books, instead deciding to explore a bit more. Now that his assumptions were correct, there should be one more room. By this time he had several clones walking around, lighting torches in every room or searching for interesting information. Once he was done exploring, he would make a ton of copies to look at all the ninjutsu scrolls and literature. Naruto continued the path down the hall until he came to one last door. The hallway didn't branch or anything. This was the last stop, the door that contained the art of his ancestors, Fuinjutsu. He made his way inside and he was shocked to see that this room was easily twice the size of the Ni Enjutsu room. He let his hand glide over the various scrolls and books and tried to catch a glimpse of some of the titles. He let his eyes rest on a title. He didn't know why, the title just seemed to scream out to look at him. Fuinjutsu. Restricting the physique 3 feet. Naruto wondered out loud. He opened it carefully. He didn't want to damage his family's treasures and browsed to the pages. His eye caught something again. He could almost swear it was the Kyuubi that was making him look at it. He looked through the chapter. and smiled the most evil smile one would ever see on him. His clones had finished placing the light sources everywhere and he could see the vast expanse of knowledge everywhere. He turned around once, twice, 3 times but still kept on turning around. He laughed for the first time in the last couple of months. He had found his ancestral home, and though he wasn't able to find anything more about his mother, he had found the means to try to make his own clan, his own villag. And maybe even a way to take the ultimate form of revenge. All he would have to do is study. It was something that he hated to do. And hate was putting it mildly, but he was no longer a foolish boy. He was a grown man that understood the responsibilities of being a leader. He could not just become a leader of people if all he could do was use brute strength to fight. He could not start a clan without it being any different than a normal family. No, he would need knowledge, patience and the determination to do things that he didn't like to do. Naruto dispelled his clones and closed his eyes for a moment to let the dizziness die down. He made his way outside and created 50 clones. He would build a house here, on top and around this entrance so he could sleep and eat. It wouldn't do if the entrance closed and he was stuck inside without knowing how to get out. He knew the way in. And it really wouldn't do for him to ruin or burn something if he ate or was in any way careless. His fountain of knowledge. He needed to check on one more thing. Kuruma, you awake? What is it, Naruto? I'm going to test something, but I'm probably gonna pass out. Could you keep track on how long I am out? Quote, what are you up to? Revenge on the Uchiha. Then I will help however I can. Now all that was left was to use his treasure. 6 months after Naruto had found his treasure, Tsunade and his grandson Inari were sitting on their porch, looking at building plans. Business had been great after the war to rebuilding several places. But after that, not so much. The only reason that they were looking over schematics now was to give Inari a better understanding of different types of construction work. Tsunade was getting old. He still builds, of course, but he was now more of a contractor than an actual worker. That was where Inari came in. It was always better for a leader to have knowledge and experience he gained from working to the top. A cough interrupted their sitting and they looked up to see a sharp-looking young man standing in front of him. Tsunade adjusted his glasses to get a better look at the visitor. He was a very tall man, easily reaching 5 feet 11 inches. He was wearing dark red geta underneath a black kimono. The only thing special concerning the cloth were the 2 golden embroidered kanji of wisdom on the left and strength on the right. Over the black kimono was a long white haori with black waves on the bottom. It was only when he saw the face that recognition began. The man had long blonde hair to the middle of the back with 2 spiky bangs framing his face, 2 deep blue azure eyes above an amused smile in the middle of 6 whisker marks. Naruto-kun. Naruto ni. 2 voices rang out. The group drank some tea which Tsunade brought and so the 4 started talking about old times, adventures and new dreams. Inari shared his dream of wanting to become the most famous architect ever known and Tsunade shared that he wanted one more, project before retiring completely. All 3 men were amused when Tsunade blushed and said she would like to meet someone nice again, now that Inari was all grown up. Her blush turned darker when she looked at Naruto, much to annoyance of Inari and amusement of Tsunade. Naruto just gave her a kind smile, not knowing the best reaction to give. It was after the conversation died down that Naruto gave a new topic. One that would fulfill 2 dreams in one go. He wanted Inari and Tsunade to build a village. Inari would get to design most of it, with directions and of course the wishes of Naruto, and Tsunade would get to build a ninja village. Not just rebuild like Konoha, but build it from scratch. Naruto said he wanted to build it on his ancestors' ruins. To forget one's ancestors is to be a brook without a source, a tree without a root. Naruto nodded. Naruto left the family to go to his next destination. He had given 3 things for Inari to consider for his plans. The center of the city, his own compound and a harbor. That is, if the family decided to accept the project. Naruto was sure they would. He could see a fire in their eyes being lit during his proposal. He said he would be back in 2 months for an answer. If he was correct, they would start planning right away. The fifth Mizukage was having a small rampage because of yet another friend of her getting married. She only halted when Chojuro came in with a tall blonde man. She recognized him immediately. Who didn't? The two greeted each other and had a short talk about the happenings of the world and the well-being of Kiri. The Mizukage was not just known for her prowess in battle and her ethereal beauty, but she was quite a sharp woman as well. She saw that there was something her guest came here to do, and without beating around the bush, she asked him about it. Did you know that Uchiha Sasuke has become the Rokudaime Hokage? That sentence was all it took for Kiri to break their alliance with the village hidden in the leaf. She would probably never be able to understand why a village would instate a traitor that has fought to doom the world as the leader of the most prestigious of ninja villages. She had not forgotten her own fight with the Uchiha before the war started at the Cage Summit. But she still didn't know why the boy was here. Was he here to ask for help to commit a coup? Her second question was answered straightforward. He came here to see if she would come to Konoha's aid if there would ever be an attack against them. She had said that as long as the corruption was so deep in the ranks of Konoha, she would not be able to trust them. And those you do not trust, you do not support, especially not in their line of work. His request halted her thoughts for a moment. He asked permission to rebuild Uzushio. She didn't understand at first. She was not yet born when the land of whirlpools was destroyed. So with a brief explanation he said he would leave her to her thoughts, that he would have a bite to eat. He would come back in 4 hours to see if she had made up her mind. True to his word, Naruto returned 4 hours later, with a happy smile and a toothpick between his teeth. He looked at her expectantly, but made no sound in question. He just waited to see if she had any questions, waited to see if she had any remarks, and waited to see if she had an answer. She had all three. There weren't many questions or remarks, but based on his replies, she would have an answer. What would they plan to do for work? Seeing as Whirlpool was uninhabited, she asked for possibilities for war. She noted about dangers of building a new village, and she noted about the dangers of a clan. Terumi May was a bit insulted when she heard her guest laughing after she was finished with her barrage of questions and pointers. But after he gave a short, almost too short, answer to any points she raised, she settled down. She had one final question, before giving her approval. What would the blonde do to Konoha? His answer was annoying. That's a secret. She gave her approval. This young man was not the brash boy she saw during the war. His answers were satisfying. So why not? The blonde showed his foxy grin and he disappeared, leaving a tiny vortex behind as soon as he got his answer. Even while he already left, she could hear his words, "See ya soon." Killer B, the Jinchuriki of the eight-tailed demon, was just finished with his newest concert tour. The tour took him to 2 whole restaurants that wouldn't mind him showing his Anko rap to the customers. To say he was a bit disappointed would be an understatement. But he would continue to try and show the world what his musical art was all about. He rapped the last part of his lyrics and waited for any sort of applause to burst out, if there was any. He didn't expect any, but one can always hope. It was for that reason that he and, without him noticing, the rest of the audience were looking for the source of the enthused applause. That sound. D from somewhere in the back. The Jinchuriki of the eight-tailed octopus, Yuki, strained his eyes and almost removed his glasses when he saw a familiar figure. He recognized the blonde hair and blue eyes, but the black kimono with golden kanji, the white haori with black waves, and the dark red get made him doubt about the identity. The clapper of hands didn't have the normally accompanying headband protector that should be there. When his nickname of Old Man Octopus rang out, all doubt was gone. The two brothers in arms let their fists meet in a sign of amity and their way to silently communicate between demon containers. The people watched in amazement as the tall bulky man and the taller lithe man went from expression to expression without saying a word. There was only one other man that had seen the two communicating like this, and he was currently in Konoha. The two fists returned to the side of their owners and both left, one with a vortex in his wake and the other with a bolt of lightning. The two individuals stood in front of the door to the Raikage's office, as Mabui started at the sudden arrivals. Naruto wondered how many more women would blush at the sight of him, but shrugged it off when she moved in front of them. He did look a little bit though when there seemed to be an accentuated sway in her hips and a slightly lower than normal bow to show them in. He was a warm-blooded male after all. The two men waited for only a minute so that it could finish up with his trusty weights. The Yondaime Raikage wasn't getting any younger, but he looked as ready to pulverize everything in his path as he did 4 years ago, when Naruto met the bulking dark-skinned man. The leader of Kumo did his loud greeting and Naruto decided that for this conversation he would something a bit more ing the lines of discreet. Naruto took a seat in one of the chairs in front of A's desk. And waited till the older man was finished rambling. Naruto was never on real friendly terms with A. Sure, he respected him, but they wouldn't share a cup of tea anytime soon. No, he had B for that. He warned the man in advance that he would erect a sound barrier and only lifted an eyebrow before B assured his brother that it was for the best. The two brothers had an altercation just when Naruto was moving out into the battlefield and the two single-letter named men ca. Me to a strong understanding and an even bigger mutual respect for one another, so if B said all was okay, then it probably was. The blonde demon container weaved several hand signs before a black translucent dome encircled them. Darui and Mabui came storming onto the room when the loud noises stopped coming from within the Raikage office, but they lowered their arms slightly when they saw who was within. When A gave them a sign that everything was in order and that he could handle it, the two Kumo nin left. B was certain that Naruto planned the barrier in advance because of his brother's temper, when said brother nearly exploded in anger. One could say with a fair amount of certainty that A was not pleased with Uchiha Sasuke as the next Hokage. A had lost an arm and almost his brother to the boy. Not to mention the hundreds of troops in the world almost when the raven-haired boy fought alongside Uchiha Madara. He wanted to plan an attack to get his hands on the little right away. But he forgot about the barrier when he started yelling for Darui and Mabui to get their asses here on the double. B paid the price for laughing at his big brother when he got knocked on the head. When the Raikage finally cooled down a bit, Naruto made his move. His answer if Kumo would come to Konoha's aid if they would be attacked was easy to see by the older man's act, so all he had to do now was ask two little questions. Would he allow the blonde to resurrect Uzushio and would he allow Naruto to deal with the Uchiha? He gave as much time as he had to Rumi-Mei to think about everything and said he would be back in 4 hours to hear his reply. He had of course no idea that his actions of the next 4 hours would create an unbreakable bond with Kumo forever. As soon as he lowered the barrier and left the Raikage's office, he ran into Mabui and Darui, who were having a short conversation. They were talking about the Benihisago, where two of their comrades were still trapped in. Naruto had unlocked many secrets with his relentless studies and he knew of the two weapons. He walked up to the duo and asked them to show it, that he might know something to help. He was met with skeptical looks, but he knew what the looks on their faces meant. We've tried everything else, so why not? The newly formed trio made their way to a secluded hall to a secluded room with one lone guard standing in front of the door. The Kumo nin bowed to his superiors and walked up to Naruto to thank him. The man was apparently someone he had directly saved by landing on an infiltrator ready to kill the guard. The Kumo nin opened the door to let them in and Darui showed Naruto the items they held that once belonged to the Sage of the Six Paths. Naruto walked by each item and let his hand gently stroke every item they had. He saw the Bashozen, the Kohaku no Yohei, the Shichiseiken and the Benihisago. The item he was to look at. Darui was looking with critical eye at every move the blonde made. These were treasures of Kumo after all, and no matter how legendary their guest was and no matter how much he had done during the war, he was, is and never will be a shinobi of their village. Darui downright refused to leave when Naruto requested it of him. He would definitely not leave this room without taking the blonde with him. Naruto gave him an ultimatum: some privacy or his friends. It took Mabui to drag the eye-covering man out. Neither of the two had any idea what was going on inside, and they had to fight their urge to take a peek. They started when the door opened and Naruto let them back in. Their eyes went wide as they took a look at several skeletons, the Kokenjo and more importantly, Samui and Atsui. The two siblings were out cold and were rushed to the hospital as quickly as possible. Darui took a hold of the Kokenjo, which was worn by Kinkaku during the war and was supposed to be inside the Kohaku no Yohei. Darui almost demanded to know why Naruto knew how to handle the famed tools of the mythical sage, but an infuriating grin was his reply. Can you show me where the best ramen is found? When the appointed time after 4 hours came, I was sitting with the most expensive bottle of sake in town and some equally expensive bowl of ramen. The blonde's love for the delicacy was as famed as his strength, so when the Raikage found out that the young man had freed 2 of his best junin and one of the most treasured items of their village, there were only a few options to choose from to repay the debt. He granted Naruto the possibility to start a new village on his ancestral ground, and he was allowed to handle Sasuke, while watched. He did want to know 2 things. What would he do to Sasuke and how did he operate the tools? He said the answer to the latter was a secret. Naruto left Kumo to go to the final person to see before heading home, leaving the Raikage and his brother rolling on the floor laughing after having the first question answered. X. There was no village in the world that welcomed the blonde Jinchuriki as the village hidden in the sand. The people adored him there, the children worshipped him there, and the elders respected him there. The reason was simple: he had saved their village 3 times. He saved them from Orochimaru's deception during the sound invasion. He had given them the most capable, honest and hard-working Kazekage since their founding father, and he had saved that Kazekage from the clutches of death itself. In other words, he could do pretty much everything and they would still kiss the ground on which he walked. He doesn't want that, of course, but that was just their sentiment put in mere words. The Kazekage sat with his siblings in his office waiting for his best friend to come in. He had known the blonde was coming as soon as the young man stepped into the desert. Gaara's control of sand was godlike and told him everything he wanted to know by just touching it. He let a nearly imperceptible smile settle on his face as he watched how the people treated Naruto. If he knew how, he would have laughed out loud at the blonde's reaction to the attention. As a fellow demon wielder, he knew how lonely the life could be and how one's village could treat their kind. He was happy to say that his village wasn't like that anymore. When the last Uzumaki entered the office, he greeted his friends and was getting tired as Tamari gave him a seductive smile. He figured it must be because he looked like his father, who was rumored to be even more sought after than Uchiha Sasuke was when the raven-haired was still an academy student. Their chit-chat lasted a good few hours. The 4 were close to each other, so they shared practically everything. After being invited to Kankuro's upcoming wedding, Naruto went down to business. Like the other cages he had visited, he asked for Gaara's permission and maybe some help in building an A.W. Uzushio. Gaara didn't need 4 hours to think about it and agreed on the spot. Since the sand invasion, the relationship was stronger than ever between Suna and Konoha. Suna was therefore informed right away of the succession of Senju Tsunade. It took the redhead 5 minutes to compose a reply message, canceling the alliance between the 2 villages. As Terumi May had said, with a traitor as leader, how can one trust the people? With their business out of the way, Naruto didn't leave right away. He was pretty close to Konoha, so he could spend the night here. With his newfound speed, he would reach the gates of his hometown within a day. So the 4 had dinner. Naruto met Kankuro's fiancée, which was amusing since she was a shinobi as well. Though she was used to people of high standing, her brother-in-law being the Kazekage, she was still a little star-struck by Naruto's presence. After a fun meal, a hot bath and a nice comfortable sleep, Naruto said that he would return in time for the wedding and left, leaving behind a vortex in Hi's former spot. Kamizuki Izumo and Hagane Katetsu were playing a relaxing game of Wicked Grace. They had almost nothing to do that day with little to no traffic to deal with. They were seated in such a way that they would see if someone show up on the horizon. That is exactly why they threw their playing cards all over their little outpost in surprise when there was suddenly a blonde stranger next to them. He came out of nowhere. It took the two a bit to get over their little scare. They probably neared a heart attack with that little joke. They used those few minutes, however, to identify their visitor. Uzumaki Naruto was home again. They took in his new attire and gave approving nods at his stylish new look. It was one hell of an improvement to make from the hideous orange he had before. Since the blonde was no longer a genin or whatever, he had permission to leave and enter the village as he wished, the small perks of being a senin. They watched in puzzlement as Naruto created a shadow clone as soon as he said goodbye and disappeared. The Naruto clone went to Naruto's apartment and was glad to see that it was left untouched. The clone went inside and took in the mess that was his living arrangement. He discarded it for now and went straight towards his bedroom. He cleaned it up a bit, throwing away old clothes and other junk. One would wonder why he moved the bed to the side, but it was all part of his plan. Directly underneath his bed's old location he placed two seals a certain distance away from each other. After he had placed the seals, he put the piece of furniture back. The clone thought about cleaning up the house for a brief second but then dispelled himself. The real Naruto was looking for Hyuga Hinata. The talks with the cages were a piece of cake compared to the conversations he was about to have with a few people in his hometown. He found the girl alone in a park, which was just perfect. She saw him as soon as he came in sight and started to nervously fumble with her fingers and could barely look at the boy. She really didn't want him to see her blush or her train wreck of nerves. He greeted the girl kindly, but warily, and the pupilless girl feared for the worst. He made a bit of small talk, but found out after a few sentences that she was way too tense for an actual conversation, and truth be told, he was just stalling. He took a deep breath and turned towards her. His face completely serious. Hinata broke out of her mumbling and fumbling state to do the same. She had to see this through, no matter how much this might hurt her. "Thank you, Hinata-chan, for waiting all this time for me." The girl just flicked her dark blue hair behind her ear and gave him a small smile. "I have something to tell you, but before I start, I will tell you this in advance. It is the most selfish request you will ever hear, and it may hurt you to hear me say what I'm going to say. Do you still want to hear it?" Hinata took a few very deep breaths, her mind running a mile a minute with every breath through all possible scenarios. She came to the conclusion that in the very worst case, he would say that she was too weak and unworthy of him. It would break her probably, but it would also be necessary for her to be able to move on. So she nodded. She needed to hear his answer. What she heard pretty much rocked her world, and she wasn't sure if it was in a good way or a bad way. He had admitted that he had strong feelings for her too, but that there was a complication, her bloodline. She found it almost funny when he first said it, but would wait until he finished talking to ask why that was a problem. It was a good thing she waited. Apparently he had awakened his own bloodline, a bloodline thought to be lost to the world and one that nobody would ever expect at the place that it reappeared. The reason it was almost extinct was that the wielder had to meet the requirements for the bloodline to Awa Ken. It required the perfect body, the perfect spirit, and a vast amount of knowledge. He was the first to acquire it the way it was intended since the bloodline was recorded. The problem was that if her own bloodline was to be thrown into the mix, the chances of their offspring having it would be 0, since every child of a Hyuga got a Byakugan, without exception. It would mean that the bloodline from the Uzumaki clan would die with him, and that was what he wanted to prevent. He therefore came with the idea to have more than one wife. This is where things got rocky. He asked her if she could share him. She passed out when he said it. Naruto just waited until she woke up. When she did, He continued his talk with her. He wanted to start the Namikaze clan with her. His bloodline combined with hers would probably create something new. Since his father was clanless, they could start one with that name. He would like another wife that was without clan or bloodline to resurrect the Uzumaki clan, and he could then pass on his own bloodline. She could understand it, but she really wasn't sure if she liked the idea of sharing the blonde. But she would let him finish. Naruto also informed her of his plans to recreate the village of Uzushio. That needed a bit of explaining since Uzushio was practically erased from history. She had to say that she was interested in it, more because how passionate Naruto talked about it than the actual history part of the story. He ended his story by saying that he had a plan in the making, but that he would only let her in on it if she agreed with him. He made sure she understood it wasn't personal, but for her safety, so she wouldn't be held accountable for anything that might happen in the future. The blonde Jinchuriki understood completely that she wanted some time to think about it. It was quite the request he had asked of her. He didn't say anything else besides that he would like hear a reply within a week, so he could plan accordingly. He gave her a hug, before he left in a small vortex. Hinata remained slightly dazed, trying to process all the information she had just received. Was she really willing to do this? Abandon her village to join Naruto and actually share him with another woman? Or women? He mentioned one, but what about his plan? She had heard about the Clan Restoration Act, and it stated that a surviving clan member can have up to 3 to 4 wives to restore his clan. Since Naruto wanted to make 2 clans, does that mean she had to share the boy she had been in love with for over a decade with 5 other women? She fainted again, but she had a week to gain her answer. At least he was honest and told her beforehand. He gave her time to think about it. And she would use every minute of it. Uchiha Sasuke was not a happy man. He wanted to start the restoration of his clan. According to Konoha rules he could have 3 wives, but his clan rules stated he may only have 1. He was unsure if he even wanted 3 women around him nagging all the time. Sakura was enough as it is. He liked her, yes, she had good hips, so she would have easier labors. Or that was what the urban myth said anyway. Other than that, he couldn't care less about her. It was just frustrating that he had to wait so long for the wedding. He wanted to get started with it right away. But traditions were of the essence. He would not discard propriety to have children. He just had to wait for a few more weeks, then he would be married. If only it wasn't a taboo to have before marriage. He left his train of thought when he heard knocking at the door. He gave permission to enter and felt a satisfied smirk settle on his face as the dope came in. His smirk left and changed to a questioning look when the blonde former teammate looked at him with a neutral expression. He thought he would see more sadness or anger after stealing his dream of becoming Hokage and his girl, but he saw nothing. It angered him somewhat to see Naruto deal with it all so casually. But that was personal and this was probably business-orientated. Hello Sasuke, it's been a while. The Uchiha just nodded in agreement. It really had been a while. I just wanted this to be done face to face and get this over with. Sasuke looked confused at the calm demeanor of Naruto. I hereby break any relationship we ever had. You are nothing more to me than the Rokudaime Hokage. Sasuke would never have expected this, but he had to admit that it took guts to do this. The 2 former friends stood up and shook hands for the last time. Sasuke could feel a sting on his hand and looked a bit angry at Naruto, who just chuckled and apologized. This was the only way he would ever been able to take revenge, by putting more than the needed amount of strength in his handshake. The 2 parted and as soon as the blonde left, he turned on his Sharingan to see if he placed some kind of genjutsu or juinjutsu on him. Finding nothing, he shrugged it off, believing that it was nothing more than a handshake with too much power. As soon as Naruto left the Hokage tower, his grin never left his face. He had several more stops to make, but he had finished his 2 most important ones. He would take a break for now and headed for Ichiraku Ramen. He had missed their ramen in the 8 months he had been gone. And he wanted to ask them something. Naruto had been visiting his old friends during the week and had caught up with all of them. He had been introduced to fiancés and girlfriends, fiancés and boyfriends. The blonde was surprised by some of the choices. The loudmouthed Kiba had found a pretty dominant girl, who almost literally had him on a leash. He had unfortunately missed Shino's wedding, but was pleased to meet his wife, who was as quiet as the bug user. Apparently it was a bug user thing, since she used them as well. It was no surprise that Neji ended up with Tenten. She always was smitten with the Hyuga prodigy. Rock Lee had found a nice civilian girl. And that was just a few of them. All of Konoha 11, minus Sakura, who was not as welcome as before thanks to the whole dumping Naruto in the way she did fiasco, had gathered once for a dining party at a restaurant. It was both amusing and disturbing to see Choji's girlfriend out-eat him, but he seemed to love his girl even more for it. Chiho kept on trying to feed Shikamaru, which suited him perfectly since he didn't have to perform the troublesome task of picking up his utensils. All in all, everything was fun. But the week had passed and Naruto went to the park where he found Hinata a week prior. He was nervous to say the least. But that was to be expected. She was about to give verdict to a selfish request that he never thought would ask of anybody. He sat down and thought about the shy girl until she came into view. He gave her a gentle smile and she blushed and gave him the same. They sat down and remained quiet for quite some time. Naruto didn't dare to breach the silence, he would await her decision. Half an hour later, Hinata finally breached the silence. There will have to be certain rules. Naruto was elated at the news, but would wait till their talk was finished before he would jump in joy. Hinata had to muster all her courage and willpower to look Naruto in the eye when she said what he would accept and wouldn't allow. Of course, several things had to be negotiated, but she had made her conditions clear. Naruto gave his first girl a kiss on the cheek and hugged her to him. Now he could proceed with his next step of his plan. He asked her to set up a meeting with her father 3 days to date and that they would meet 2 days from now. He would head to the next phase of his plans. He would tell her all about his vision in 2 days and that it couldn't be done out here in the open. Hinata gave Naruto a quick peck on the whisker marks and tried to remain steady enough to go to her father. Naruto made his way to the next person he had to see. Senju Tsunade was a little bit disappointed that Naruto had not visited her yet. They had briefly met on the street while he was with his friends, so they hadn't been able to talk for long. But he promised he would come see her as soon as he had finished something extremely important. Something he had to take care of before he would have something of equal importance to discuss with her. 3 days later, 8 days after his return to the village, she welcomed him into her home. She had inherited the mansion of her grandfather, but it was simply too big for her. She had sold it to a richer civilian before she left the village many years ago and bought a small 2-story home so she would have something she could call her own. Of course she lost the rest of the money with gambling and alcohol, but she at least had this. Naruto stepped into the home and was greeted by Shizune and Tsunade. The latter was more than a little bit surprised when he greeted her with just her name. No, Ba-cha, or whatever infuriating nickname he ever gave her. She was slightly worried about it. Naruto had requested they stay sober for a bit and though reluctant, Tsunade agreed. So with just some tea and a few rice crackers, the three talked about the past 8 months. The female blonde noted that Naruto seemed amused at the fact that the shinobi weren't all that motivated anymore because a traitor was the leader of their village, but all 3 of them had expected it to a certain degree. They also knew nobody would ever do anything about it, they needed work and nobody needed a civil war. At some point Naruto asked if he and Tsunade could have a private talk. It was in good timing because Shizune's shift started soon in the hospital. Naruto hugged the raven-haired lady goodbye and as soon as she left turned all serious towards the last Senju. I'm going to ask you to let me finish talking before you hit me. I will show you something and propose something else. You might become angry and even a bit scared, but I would like to say my part and then you can react however you want. Tsunade really wanted a drink right about now. The tone in her fellow blonde's voice made her worry quite a bit. She watched as Naruto weaved several hand seals and she found herself in a translucent black dome with seals on its surface. She watched in amazement at the creation and turned to Naruto in wonder. What the hell did he learn in his ancestral home while he was away? She braced herself for his demonstration and proposal. Naruto had to get the scary part out of the way first, so he closed his eyes and went into tailed beast mode, which surprised Tsunade for a moment, but she had seen it in the battle against Madara, so she knew what to expect. The major surprise, however, was when he reopened his eyes. The Senju heir slightly backed away in horror as she saw the orbs. Naruto deactivated his tailed beast mode, but his eyes never changed. She gasped in horror. Those eyes, they are. Yes, they are. Which leads me to the proposal I mentioned. Naruto deactivated his eyes so that Tsunade would calm down a little and he could finish their talk. He knew what was going to happen next and he already sent chakra to protect his head in advance. It would probably not be enough, but it would at least soften the blow. I wish to rebuild the Senju clan with you. He was glad he reinforced his skin. The blow would have broken any other man. He let her rant a bit about how the super pervert had contaminated him before he died. And that she would make sure to beat it out of him. He didn't move, flinch or say anything until she was finished. Now that he said what he wanted, he pulled out an expensive bottle of sake he had bought in the country of rice. She had been sober when she heard his proposal, now she could have a drink. And drink she did. He had to stop her from drinking too much. He wasn't finished just yet. When she gulped down a few big swigs, she returned to listening to the young man in front of her. She was curious as hell to what he was going to say. So she kept the bottle in her hand, prepared for the rest of this talk. She didn't drink a drop afterwards. He had raised some interesting points. The Senju clan was indeed going to die with her. She had always wanted children, but when Dan died, so had her lust for life. By the time she realized it, her chances of having children had died when her menopause began. She had regretted it, but accepted it in the end. But Naruto was giving her another chance. It was an awkward chance in every meaning of the word awkward, but did the benefits outweigh it? His whole plan of Uzushio was amusing enough, but she really didn't care. She had already made up her mind to leave the village if Naruto would. Shizune had not really built something for herself here, she was just not interested at the moment, but unlike Tsunade, Shizune was in her mid-30s, so she had time to find someone. So Shizune would most likely join her. Naruto left her to her thoughts and told her to come to his apartment tomorrow if she was interested in hearing the rest. He had everything figured out, he said. She was glad he left the bottle. At a peaceful dango shop, one Mitarashi Anko almost choked on her treat. She was looking at the reincarnation of the fourth Hokage. The wet dream of every woman that wasn't. And probably even them. She wondered how the hell somebody could change so much in less than a year, but in the end Allied didn't care at all. The boy was standing before her and she was letting her eyes feast. Naruto was starting to get the hang of all the attention he was getting from the opposite, so he would just give her a moment before he would say anything. It took him longer than expected, but after a few minutes he bought 20 skewers of dango and asked the purple-haired woman to accompany him. Following the snack, she almost wiggled her imaginary tail at the thought of 20 free dango sticks. The duo made their way to Training Ground 44, Anko's favorite place in the village. Nobody ever came here of their own free will besides her. After getting the third skewer, she remembered to be suspicious about the isolated location, but soon forgot to think more about it when Naruto waved the 4th stick with sweets in her face. The blonde Jinchuriki waited patiently for Anko to finish the treats he bought her. He knew that it was a cheap trick to lure her away like that, but here he had privacy and somewhere the woman before him felt comfortable. The last little ball of sticky goodness disappeared down her throat when she licked her lips to wipe away the last bits of sauce from her face. The interrogation specialist turned towards her companion and waited for him to talk. After all those years in her line of work, she easily knew when something big was up. She was a bit irked when Naruto asked for her kunai and shuriken, but complied anyway. She had more than enough ways to hurt him without a blade in her hand. She regretted giving them away though when he started talking. I would like to rebuild a clan with you. She went to smack him as hard as she could for being a pervert, but refrained when he just sat still with his eyes opened even when he knew what was coming. His face remained serious the whole time and she had the suspicion that there was more to it than just baby making. So she lowered her hand and waited for the man to continue his story or talk or whatever you may want to call it. When he finished talking, she was glad she was sitting on a really thick branch, she would have fallen off otherwise. He had explained stuff about a bloodline and some master plan. She picked it all up sure, but the one thing she picked out is that he chose her because of who she was. Not what she was, but who she was. She guessed she could have drawn a worse fate, but as it stood she had yet to find something that would satisfy her both physically and mentally. Most men just thought her a quick. The ones that wanted a serious commitment were mostly freaks. The people that didn't shun her for her former association with Orochimaru either fell in one of those two categories or were simply not interested. She wasn't getting any younger. Besides that, it would be interesting. How many people witnessed the rise of a village? And how many of those would stand at the top of it? She was interested for sure. That Naruto looked devastatingly handsome, like his father, and was her real-life savior, were a UGE bonus. But he was still asking a lot from her. Naruto left just like he did with Tsunade. He told her to come to him tomorrow if she agreed. Then he would reveal more of his plan. This was a lot to process, even if he bribed her with Dango X. The very next day Naruto sat at his now cleaned kitchen table, drinking some tea, waiting for Hinata and hoping that his other two potential partners would show up. If not, he would have to think of something else. Hinata showed up and she joined him for tea. They had a nice slow conversation about the weather and some silly new gossip in town. It wasn't before long that Anko showed up. The two girls were a bit uncomfortable around each other, but Naruto had a way of getting people to do what he wanted, and if he never noticed it. It was his biggest asset, influencing people without realizing it. Things became really awkward when Tsunade came in. Naruto simply smiled at the ladies and let the three women talk to each other. The conversation they had was short. The Senju was one of the legendary Sannin, a Sennin, the granddaughter of the founding father and the previous Hokage. Besides that, she was 3 times as old as Hinata and twice as old as Anko. Suffice to say, there was a bit of tension between the different generations. Naruto had explained the most to Hinata, but only mentioned other women to Anko and Tsunade, so the two older women were highly surprised when they saw each other. But like before, Naruto eased the tension quite easily. He asked the ladies if they were sure about it, that it was not too late to change their mind. But the chances they were offered were worth it. Naruto took them to his bedroom, which led to 2 knuckle-cracking women and 1 blushing girl, but that faded when he moved away his bed and revealed the 2 seals he placed there when he came back. He placed Hinata in the middle of the seal on the left and told her not to move and take 3 steps to the left when he was finished. Anko and Tsunade blinked several times when they saw Hinata disappear in a black and white blur. Naruto motioned for Anko to come over and did the exact same thing, and after that with Tsunade. He then stepped on it himself. The 3 new arrivals to the ruins were watching in amazement as they looked around at the fallen village. Naruto arrived there immediately after Tsunade and waited quietly to let them have a moment. When they turned back to him he asked them to follow him. The ladies did as he asked and entered after him into the only building standing. Building was a bit of an exaggeration, it was a cabin with a bed, a fireplace and a fountain. They wanted to ask him why he had a fountain in here, but they looked worried when he grabbed a kunai from within his sleeve. Ian cut into his palm. The three women watched in amazement as the blonde man placed his hand inside the fountain and the thing lit up like a bonfire. They shielded their eyes, not unlike Naruto had done, but they didn't witness the shifting of the stone, they just looked surprised to see an entry. After the light faded, Naruto led the woman down the stairs and with a flick of his fingers, torches started to light the circular room they were in. They would have looked around but there was nothing to see here besides two rounding walls leading to either the stairs they just used or a 9 feet wide hallway, so they silently followed Naruto to the hallway to what he wanted to show them. He walked up to the first door and showed them the first library. Tsunade gasped, Hinata looked amazed and Anko was bored. It were just a bunch of books. Naruto smiled softly, he had just shown the tip of the iceberg. Even though Anko did not react at the history or geography section, she sure as hell did react when she saw the ninjutsu and the other 4 libraries. All 3 of the women browsed around, looking for something or just grabbing a random book and perusing through it. They all had the same question. What the hell is this place? Naruto had just the answer for them. It took him quite some time as well to figure out. Why would one clan have all of the known jutsu recorded and ways to learn them? Why would one clan have records of every country and every figure of importance since the word, recording, was invented? He really didn't know the why, but he knew the result. A clan that was feared so much it took 2 whole countries to take them out. 10 years ago he would never have believed he would ever say this, but knowledge is power. This archive might be a good word for it, taught people the benefits, weaknesses and so many other things that could be exploited. All these tomes were what made Uzushio feared. After the ladies had a chance to explore, he took them all back to his apartment in Konoha, this time with the seal on the right. He waited a bit to see if there were any questions they might have. Not seeing any questions arise, he began telling about his plan, the plan that would cover his revenge, the rebuilding of his own village and clan and a coup d'état. Anko and Tsunade were a bit startled by the mention of it. A coup d'état was a capital offense when discovered. She figured that this was the reason that pretty much every conversation they had with Naruto, including this one, was held in a privacy barrier. Still though, a coup was not something to think lightly about. They would listen closely for now and beat some sense into him if the plan wasn't good enough. So he listed all the things that he had set in motion. The rebuilding of Uzushio, the meetings with all of the cages, except for the Tsuchikage since he hadn't had the time for that yet. He mentioned what he was planning to do now that all 3 of them agreed to become his wife. Naruto felt a bit like his late teachers at that. Both of them were perverts for concerning themselves with erotic novels all the time and here he was, the student that always mocked them for it, planning to marry 3 women. But he digressed. He told them how important it was for the Senju clan to rebuild. He told them what he wanted to do with the Hyuga clan and why he would go to them first. He made sure to assure both women about his feelings for them. He didn't want them to think they were just a baby production unit to him. He, honest to everything he cared for, loved them. He really did. He noticed that Tsunade had lowered her hand again and Hinata gave him a small shy smile again. Safe. The evening had been a long one, filled with questions and answers. The women making certain rules about what they were comfortable with and what they absolutely wouldn't allow. Most of the latter was pointed at him instead of each other. He just smiled and accepted pretty much every condition they had. The next morning was interesting. Hinata had told the blonde that her father would expect excellent manners and would hold a tea ceremony, as he did with every meeting of importance. So both Hinata and Tsunade had spent the early morning drilling the blonde Jinchuriki in propriety and what was expected of him during a tea ceremony. Naruto, never having seen such a ceremony before, had no idea there was so much to know when drinking tea. He only started drinking it a year or 2 ago. He just listened and watched as his 2 women instructed him. The time had come to face the Hyuga patriarch. He had seen the man once or twice and fought beside him briefly during the war. He had heard the Hyuga talk with his deceased younger brother, and it was because of that Naruto W. Old probably have an ace up his sleeve. But it wouldn't do to just throw it on the table right from the start, so he would proceed slowly. The couple made their way to the main gate of the Hyuga compound and knocked. They would not just go in because Hinata was the heiress, but they would do everything by the book. Knocking the door is a trivial thing, but it would give time to the other party to be alerted in advance instead of just showing up in front of them. The door was opened by a stoic Hyuga servant, who ushered them inside right away. The older man led the duo to an open room with a clear view of the garden. Naruto took just the briefest of moments when he saw the small piece of landscape, which is why he would have to include his own rock guard. And with koi pond into his own compound. It just emitted a sense of serenity. Naruto and Hinata were asked to take a seat on the side of a kettle, Naruto closer to the open door than Hinata. They didn't have to wait long before Hyuga Hiashi stepped in. The three exchanged greetings, and as soon as they did, Hiashi had asked for a girl to come inside. The girl had nothing really noticeable. She was pretty enough with a fancy-looking kimono. Actually, the only thing worthy to mention about the girl was the kimono. It was a soft pink color with a dark pink obi, and on the left side was a cherry blossom tree that scattered its petals across the wind. The tea ceremony went smoothly. He really appreciated the little training session he had with Hinata and Tsunade. Without it he would never have known he had to accept with a specific hand and had to turn the bowl in his hand a fixed amount of times before drinking it and reversing the steps before returning it. Hiashi seemed to respect it though, and that was the goal of it. With the girl leaving and taking her tools with her, the two Hyugas and one Uzumaki were left alone. They shifted their position, so Hiashi would face the garden outside and Naruto would face him with Hinata beside him but slightly behind. Before we start, I would like to erect a barrier to provide protection against unwanted attention. I do not wish for this conversation to reach outside you and me. Is that agreeable, Hiashi Dono? The question caught the man off guard, but he blinked once and agreed with the odd condition. He had his ceremony, so the boy could have his precaution. The two men first talked about the current condition of Konoha. It seemed a bit peculiar at first, but Hiashi knew that the boy was aware of his council position and thought that he wanted to appeal to remove Sasuke from his title. If that was so, the boy would be disappointed, though Hiashi himself was not at all satisfied with the current leader of his village. Loyalty was a key value to the Hyuga clan. Naruto never once spoke a word of hate or revenge or anything that would or could even in the slightest be considered a threat to the village, but just stated facts, like the morale of the shinobi decreasing because of the former Misen-nin status of their Hokage, not to mention the near deaths he had caused before and during the war. But again, never once was said anything directly that could be considered treason. Taking a brief opportunity of the privacy he rarely had, he agreed as he had witnessed the swing in mood of his own family members that were enlisted. As soon as the sentence left his mouth, Naruto went down into business mode. The Hyuga noticed it and went on alert. He would not get caught off guard because the conversation was interesting and he found someone intelligent, that didn't fear his family's name, to talk to. I would like to ask your daughter's hand in marriage. In the end he was caught off guard after all. Silence was the only thing that could be said about the next 10 minutes. Neither Naruto nor Hinata nor Hiashi shifted under the sudden rising tension. The clan leader let the request mull over. As a clan leader he had to ensure the strength of the clan, but that was easily brushed aside as his daughter couldn't find any stronger suitor than the hero that saved the world and won against two of the strongest Uchiha that ever walked the earth. In all the elemental countries people had written songs in his honor, who could possibly exceed that? Though, he was without clan. As a father though, things were a little bit different. He knew the boy and obviously he knew about his talent. He was a bit worried about his spontaneous and sometimes downright reckless behavior. Though the boy might be strong, it said nothing over his heart. He knew the boy made it his way of life to always keep a promise, but would it be enough to ensure his daughter's happiness? He briefly glanced at his daughter. She had a mild blush and a small sincere smile while she kept stealing glances at the boy. She was honestly head over heels for him, and the boy so far had proven his sincerity in not flinching away. Hinata, do you wish to be wed to this man? He thought about it some more when his daughter nodded, her eyes determined. He had never seen her look at him like that before, as if she would do it with or without him. As a father, I do not think I will be able to find a better match for my daughter, but as clan leader, I cannot think of a way that someone that doesn't have clan to be approved of by the elders. Naruto smirked when he heard that. Hiashi was instantly on guard. He somehow didn't like that look in the young blonde's face. The older man watched as Naruto went through several hand seals, and the barrier around him went from a translucent black to pitch black in a second. He looked suspicious at his guest and waited for him to clarify. The next part of our conversation must not be allowed to be heard or seen by anyone other than us. I allowed the wielders of the Byakugan to see what might be said, as I am sure that there are more than enough people here that can add lips. This barrier cannot be pierced by anything, not even the all-seeing white eye of the Hyuga. Hiashi shot forward and brought his hand filled with chakra near Naruto's heart. With one simple nudge forward, he would end the possible threat. Depending on what you say, I will end you right here. There was that smirk in the blonde again. I came here to ask the father of Hinata for his blessing. If he approved, I wanted to give him an offer. If you are interested in hearing it, I would like to continue. And what is this offer you speak of? The chance to fulfill not only your ambition, but also Hinata's dream and your brother's last wish. Quote, what do you know of that? This was most disturbing, for someone to know of his goal. If you will please, I will explain why I know of it and how I can help with it. Hiashi remained on alert, but took a seat once more. Only this time he was closer to the young man than before. He listened to his guest as he told him about his overhearing of the conversation between Hiashi and his younger brother Hisashi. He was told about a talk Naruto had with Neji, in which Neji told the blonde that Hiashi regretted the tradition of the caged bird seal. And he admitted that he had a plan to deal with it, but that he might not like it. I will tell you of my proposal and let you think about it. You can accept it or you can try to stop it. That is a choice I leave up to you. Naruto was completely serious and Hiashi was oddly interested in what he was about to hear. My plan involves a coup. Now that caught the older Hyuga's attention. His eyes went wide in disbelief. A coup d'état has one major benefit. When successful, the usurper can change anything he wants. Depending on the person, it can lead to greatness or to doom. I believe I know the one person that will be able to lead it to greatness. Hiashi had to interrupt the blonde here. I will not sit here and listen to how an outsider wishes to take over my clan. The Hyuga went to stand up, but sat down promptly when the next words were spoken. It is not me who will take over. I thought that Hyuga Neji would be a strong, wise and fair leader. Hiashi wished that he had a nice bottle of sake hidden beneath one of the tatami mats. While it was true that his nephew had proven himself countless times over, a tradition the young male Hyuga started ever since the Chunin exams of so many years ago, the fact still remained that he had the caged bird seal and would never be able to stand up to a main house member. Hiashi voices his thought and watched as that annoying smirk showed itself again. Then we have to remove the cage. The only one who knew how to remove the seal has perished long ago. Removing the seal is simply done. I can erase the mark and its effects. I will be able to free all of your oppressed family members. Quote, you wish to throw away our traditions? Traditions are meant to be a guideline, not a prison. A rather fitting analogy considering the topic. Still, it has been our way for so long, it will be difficult to adjust, for both the branch house and the main house. Quote, that might be true, but they will all be free. As I understand it, the seal was also a safety measure to ensure that nobody outside of the clan would ever get their hands on your eyes if one of you might fall in battle. We can adjust the seal so it will still destroy the eyes upon death, but not suppress the person when activated. That would keep our tradition in stand of branding a member of the family upon the heir's third birthday as well as the safety of our family's bloodline. Hiyashi was letting the suggestions run freely in his mind. He had 2 more questions, but he wanted to make sure he had covered things that would cause the most problems. A coup was one thing, but if it was the cause of continuous takeovers after that, their family line would go extinct in a matter of decades. I have 2 questions. Hinata is the heir of our family, why not let her take over? Why Neji? Because Hinata will start a clan with me.